All right. So we are ready to jump right in. Thank you for agreeing to come and be a part of our media interview magic session for today. It's just about an hour, a little bit under, and it's a combination of how we at Papande look at managing media interviews and suggestions and advice from you, what you have experienced, what you've seen, and questions, things that we may learn from the questions that you ask and the advice that you bring. We're hoping to make it interactive. There's limited time, so the questions I'm going to ask that you hold until I allow the opportunity for you to ask, and then we'll answer as we go along. But please feel free, type your questions, your comments in the chat, and we can deal with them as we go. Marie Curie, Nobel Prize winner, scientist, said that nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. And now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. And this applies really so much when it comes on to interacting with the media and communication in general. You see, what happens is that many times we're in our heads and we're worrying about things and we're having conversations in our heads with ourselves, and that interferes with our ability to perform. So when it comes on to media interviews in particular, what we're going to do is see if we can share some information with you. Our training usually is more about doing, but in an hour, there's not a lot of doing that can happen. So we're talking about information to help you understand better how to prepare, how to deliver impactful messages, and how to handle any challenges that you're having professionally. So when we're finished, you should be able to say yes to these three things that you know better in these areas. Not necessarily know everything, that requires full training, but definitely better in these areas. All right, so we're moving through, and we really have four parts to today's session. The agenda is how I put it, or the table of contents, has us first looking at the context of the real conversation when we have media interviews. Why do I say real? We'll find out in a bit. Then we move into examining the pre-interview process, how to prepare. Then we look at when you're actually in the interview. What are you doing? What needs to happen? How can you maneuver yourself in a way you can be proud of? That at the end, when you listen back, you say, yes, that's what I intended to do. The microphone really did convey the true you. All right. It spoke your message, and then you are happy pretty much with what happened. And of course, we're facilitating any questions that you may have after we've gone through the content. With our other webinars, we have the opportunity to have several activities, etc. For this one, there's just so much to cover that I'm going to use the interaction time for your questions. So I hope you came with some, you put them in the chat, and we can engage with them, answer them, look at them as we go. All right. So the first part of today is the context of the real conversation. And when I said a real conversation, what do I mean? Well, in a media interview, yes, we know that there is you, the person that is being interviewed. There is me, the interviewer. And usually that's where the focus is. Like you're looking at this person who's asking you all the questions, and you're trying to figure out, am I answering them right? What is he going to ask me, or what is she going to ask me? And how do I give the right answer? How do I cover all the things I want to cover? Yes, this is important. Yes, the interviewer is quite important, but the real interview happens beyond the interviewer. Why do I say that? Well, there are dual conversations that you need to be having at the same time. And I don't mean the conversation with yourself in your head. So you're having the conversation with the interviewer, and who or with whom should the next conversation be happening? Let me see if you know. Type it in the chat for me, please. Let me look across, see if I can find the chat. With whom should that next conversation be happening? I see you, Rohan, Taisha. Hello. Welcome, welcome, Imani. Odell, yes. And Eddie, we are on track. We are on the same page. Yes, you're having a main conversation with the person in front of you, But the real conversation is with the people who are watching, the people who are listening, whatever the medium is, or the people who are reading the article that came out of the interview that you had. And this now brings a different kind of dimension because you have to have a different kind of focus. That real conversation means that if it's with the listeners and the viewers or the readers, then it's a lot of people that could possibly be reading or watching at the same time. And sometimes this is what makes it so scary. We're thinking, oh my God, all of Jamaica is listening. Well, it's not all of Jamaica, but you know what I mean. But no, you really need to focus primarily on not everybody who is possibly hearing, but on the people who you want to hear. Who is your target audience? That's who your main conversation should be with. In addition to that, your conversation is not with everybody or all the members of your target audience at once. I hear people say things like, everybody out there in Radio Land or Jamaica, you need to. No, people usually listen, read, or watch by themselves. That's why these images that you're seeing to the left are of individuals. I think maybe the only one really that you may have a group with is TV. So my family, for example, may gather together to watch the news. But apart from that, you're checking your tablet, you're listening to your podcast, you are listening to the radio while you do something, perhaps while you're driving, and you're reading the newspaper, the article, usually solo by yourself. So if that's what's happening when you are the person in the audience, then what needs to happen when you are the person who is giving the interview, when you're the guest? Well, you need to make sure that you are having a conversation, and that conversation is with one person at a time. So you are going to be speaking through the interviewer. The person, let's say me, I'm interviewing you. I am asking you a question. Of course, you're going to pay attention to me. Of course, you're going to listen to me. I'm asking you a question. But as you answer, remember that your answer is not just for me and primarily not for me. It's for the people that you paid the $65,000 to get an interview on the morning show, or the $165,000 to get an interview on Smile Jamaica. That's a lot of money. And it's because of the reach of the show. It's because of the people who are listening on the outside and your ability to have that conversation with them. And remember that they're not gathering like at a stage show where the MC says, people, and it's a huge crowd. It's one-on-one. So you want to have a conversation that says, when you come to my store, not when the customers in third person come to the store. If you would like to purchase, or if you want to consider courses with Paula-Anne, because that's how people listen and that's how they develop a relationship with you, the person that's speaking to them. Now, one more thing I want us to look at in terms of context before we move on to the second part of our conversation today, and that is that different kinds of interviews. So yes, we know it's not just with the interviewer. We're speaking through the interviewer to the audience members, and not to everybody in the audience, but to the ones that are in our target market that we know are the ones we want to buy our product in particular, the demographic, the age, the gender, whatever it is. And we know that we're speaking like we're speaking to one person. Sometimes, though, as the interview is arranged, it's an interview that we pay for. And sometimes it's an interview that maybe a journalist has called for. So you have to look at what kind of interview is happening, because it then impacts not those basic concept things, but certainly how you are going to listen to and engage. Chances are, in the first case, when you've paid the $65,000 for that interview on the morning show, you are going to have a set of questions that you want the content to be about. You are going to probably send in those questions. If your interviewer is amenable, if the station is amenable, then they will ask you the questions that has the questions that you have sent in. Personally, I don't like to stick to the questions that have come in. Why? Because they kind of sound, what is the word? No, they sound rehearsed. And as a radio interviewer, interviewee, we have to understand that the relationship with radio is one that is a conversation, and it depends on credibility. It depends on people being real. And when I sound like I've rehearsed the questions, then there's a question of trust. Do they then believe me when I ask you the question? Because it sounds like you paid me to ask the question. The other part of that is that when you answer and you are reading word for word what your marketing department has given you, or what you have written down as the answers that you want to say to the question, 99 times out of 100, you sound rehearsed. You sound false. You don't sound natural. And then again, the credibility question is raised. Yeah, man, you just have said that. So the recommendation is that for those marketing type interviews, you do not read word for word your answers. You do not rehearse word for word your responses. You practice answering the question so you know what you want to say. And you may put some points to remind you what you want to keep in that answer. But I recommend that you don't go word for word. With the other type of interview now, with perhaps a journalist or someone that's having a show, and they give you an idea of the topic, but you don't really know the questions, then that is a different kettle of fish, and that can be a little more intimidating. But the principles that we're going to go through apply, and we're going to help you to be more comfortable, even though you're swimming in strange waters and you don't know necessarily what they're going to ask. So far, so good. If you've got the context, then let me see if I can pull this up and you tell me what you remember about the context. What are the things I want you to remember when it comes on to media interviews? What are the main things? Where do I want you to focus? There should be a poll up and running. Most persons are saying focus on the target audience. Then coming in second are those who are saying, when speaking, do so as if directly to one listener or one viewer. And in third place, this one says it's not just with the interviewer. All right, and I'm happy that that's what the percentages look like. Yes, there are many people listening. And yes, it would be nice if everybody understood, but you are more effective if you are targeted, if you remember who your customers are, if you remember these particular people, what they like, how they think, what are the things that are important to them, what are they afraid of, and you keep those things in your mind as you answer the question so that your answers to those people who would primarily be your target audience. Great. Thank you for this. So that's the first part of our webinar today. So we understand the context. Are there any questions before we move on? You can open your mic. Let me know. Okay. So no questions so far. All right, so we're going to move along to the second part. And that is, after the context, we want to look at how you are preparing for your media interviews. For some people, it just means, let me know the questions. And I hate telling you the questions because you're going to sound sing-song. You're going to sound rehearsed, and that doesn't come across well for radio. So don't be offended when you ask what the questions will be and you are given sample questions, or you're confused, or you're just given a general topic under which the questions will fall, because this is helping to protect you, to ensure that you come across as credible. With the pre-interview process, there are some things that we want to look at. First is, what is your key message? And we're going to talk about what a key message is. Then you want to look at the kinds of research you want to do and how to anticipate the situation, what's going to happen. And thirdly, and quite importantly, but overlooked by many, what are the logistics of the interview? So let's jump right into the key message first. Now, your key message is not necessarily a tagline. It's not your motto. It can be, but when you think of a key message, I want you to think of, when the interview is over, if the audience remembers one thing, what is that one thing that they'll remember? And they're not going to remember it because you've said it over and over and over again, the same tagline, the same motto, but they'll remember it because as you've answered your questions, you have figured out ways to work in that principle, that concept, that fact into the way that you're answering the question. So people kind of remember, oh yeah, okay, I remember this about them. So what does that mean? Well, or how do you make that happen? First, you want to sit and think about what that core message is. And for some people with interviews, they have multiple, maybe like 2 or 3 key messages. I like to say 2, because the less things to focus on, the better you're able to make them have more impact. You want to define those core messages. You want to decide on 2 or 3 supporting points that you can work into your responses. And then you want to practice their delivery and inclusion from different angles. If they ask you this question, if the interviewer asks you this question, how do you answer the question and still get your key message in there without repeating your tagline? All right, because it's the same tagline, you're going to sound repetitive and you're going to sound like you're selling something a little too much. So let's say this is a second interview about a promotion you're having, and you want people to remember that the offer closes this Friday. So you can perhaps the first time say, okay, when you sign up, if you're listening, then remember that that sign up has to happen by 5 o'clock on Friday. So you go directly at it. But let's say you can say, we want to ensure you have that opportunity to be a recipient of the bonus gifts that we're giving away. And if you're going to get that gift, remember, you have to do it by Friday, that make sure that you X, Y, and Z. So you toss it in as an aside. It's not the main point of the response. Or let's say you were asking me about what Papa Day offers. Yeah. And you asked, I said, well, we have different types of communication support that we offer. What it is that you need to have a conversation so that we can hear where your needs are and then make a recommendation, because our recommendations are all about you. Each of our customers has it tailored to them. And let's say that your next question is, well, how do your costs compare to other persons? And my answer could be, well, because we take the time to make sure that what you want or what you need is what is integrated into our training design, then the process is a little longer for us in terms of the design, but then the benefits are more. So the investment in time from us and the investment financially from you reflect this fact that it's all about you. So you're here, I'm saying the same thing, but in a different kind of way in answering the question. So you need to listen to the question, figure out how to answer the question and how to work in whatever that core message is. And you have questions from different angles. How do you bring in that message? But if you haven't practiced this, then it's hard to do without repeating the words in the same way over and over. So first in preparation is identifying your key message or 2 messages and practicing how to include them. Also in preparation is you're being able to research, and research is in different areas. One is researching in your content, because you have to make sure you know it or you're not the right person for the interview. But 2 is researching the interviewer and the show or the publication. You need to have an idea who they are and what they're about. And you also want to know how your topic might be impacted by what's happening around you. You want to know how people might not be too happy with something that you have said, so you know the best way to phrase it. And you want to anticipate any questions that may come your way and practice answering the questions. So let's go with the first one. Who is the interviewer? Is it more than one interviewer? Morning show on Radio Jamaica has 2 co-hosts, but usually it's one person at a time that conducts the interview. You need to now know the personality of that person so you can figure out what kind of vibe is right for answering the questions or what they could possibly come with. You need to know about the show or about the publication. What is their listenership like? How does the program usually come across? What is the energy of the program? So that you can adjust accordingly and fit into what works for the audience members or the readers of that particular media outlet. The second thing is about current happenings and trends. So what's going on that might impact what you're talking about? For now, it's the end of the year. Can you tie in New Year's resolutions to whatever it is that you're speaking about, and have that as a part of convincing your target audience to take you up on an offer. Maybe because elections are rife, you want to stay away from using terms that refer to particular colors, green or orange, I don't know, because it is important to you that you come across as partisan. Or maybe you want to keep in mind that a particular area that you may be having an event, a promotion in, there is a concern about crime or safety. So as a part of your key messages, you're reiterating that you will have ample security on hand to look after vehicles, etc. But you have to think wider than just your topic. What are the things happening that may impact? May persons have objections to anything you say? Are you speaking about things in a way that make older people sound like you are kicking them to the curb? Are the terms you're using, even though they may not be a part of your target audience, can they come across as offensive? Because even though you're not going toward them, you don't want to offend or make enemies of anyone as well. So you want to listen through carefully as you are practicing answering your questions to how this may not sound right, and figure out another way to say it. And notice that I said, as you are practicing, that brings us to the fourth and final point in this research and anticipation part of your interview prep. And that's practice. You have to practice. And I don't mean practice by swatting the answers on the paper provided by your marketing person who gave you questions and answers. I mean thinking through what other questions could come at you, even the ones you are afraid of, particularly those that you don't want to be asked. And then practice what you would say, how you would answer. And you record them. Use your phone, you record it and you listen back and you say, that don't sound good. Or this may sound this way or that way. And what you do then is to figure out a way to answer that is better, that better integrates your key messages, whatever it is. So you have to anticipate and practice. Many persons that do interviews don't. So they come on the show, they're answering the questions, they sound nervous, and they're sticking word for word to what's on the paper. I have a copy of the paper and I'm what to do. I just have to allow them to go. The third thing when it comes on to this pre-interview process is the logistics. And it seems straightforward, it seems simple, but you'd be surprised how many people do not confirm the logistics. How long is the interview? You have a 5-minute interview and you are taking 3 minutes to answer one question. Not a good plan. And the only way to know how short you need to be is to practice answering the questions and figuring out, okay, if my time is short, if I'm interrupted or cut, how do I answer this? So you need to know your overall interview time, the length of the interview, as well as what time the interview is. Many times persons miss the interview they paid the $65,000 for because we call and they can't speak. They're driving. Or no, can you wait? Let me assume reach X or Y. Oh. So be careful. Know the time, make sure that you are ready, and make sure that you are able to adjust to the length of time that's available to you. What's the format? Are you to show up in studio? Is it going to be through Zoom? Are you to come in and they're videotaping you? Do you need to have your camera on? Or is it just on the telephone? And why is that important? Because, well, you have to prepare your space. If it is that, let's say you're doing it on the phone, try to be somewhere where it's not noisy. Try to be somewhere where there's best sound. Sometimes we want to use a headset, but it doesn't sound good. It picks up on all external noises. I have Bluetooth. I have some Bluetooth earbuds. And the thing with Bluetooth is that it picks up high-pitched noises. So if I'm doing something at night on a live call, I cannot use them. You will hear every single cricket and frog outside of my window. It picks those sounds up very well. You have to figure out how to find a quiet space, how to find somewhere with a background that's appropriate. And if it is that you are on camera, what does that mean for how you look and what you're choosing to wear? And always wear something that's comfortable, that is appropriate, but that you're comfortable with. You're not trying to, is this tight? Is this showing? Should I have done X? No. Something that you are comfortable with. There are more considerations, but in a more detailed training program, we could go through that. Know where you're going, literally the address, as in 32 Lyndhurst Road or 5 Garraway Avenue, because we've had persons who show up and it's the wrong place. Also know at that address where exactly, what room, what office, where's the studio. If you come to Radio Jamaica, you have a main lobby area, but you also have TVJ, which is around the back, a nice 3-minute walk up a long corridor. So you cannot pull in at 5 minutes to your interview. So you have to have an idea. You can ask these questions of the person that is arranging, the producer or the interviewer. You have to have an idea of where exactly it is, where I'm going, have an idea of what the traffic is like at that time. Again, I can speak to our morning show. We have interviews at 7:45. And persons assume sometimes maybe it only takes 20 minutes to get there. Well, maybe regularly. However, at that time of morning, you have to contend with horrid traffic. So you have to add another 20 minutes or maybe an hour to make sure you're there in time. So you really have to sit and think through those things. And then when you get there, who's the person who's going to help you? What's the name of the person that you're to ask for? I've had people come and they don't remember who the interview is with. They don't remember which of the many radio stations it is supposed to be on, because we have, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4 radio stations in one area. They don't remember it's with whom, and they don't have a contact for the person who arranged the interview. So they are just completely flustered. And sometimes the interview is missed. And I've had others who, luckily, they figure out eventually where they're supposed to be and with who. All right. So I'm going to ask, we got this. Finally, make sure you say the right name. You know, if you're being interviewed on Ari FM, don't say you're talking to the fame listeners. Some interviewers will not take that so well and will embarrass you because of the error. Some interviewers will ignore it and move on or nicely correct. But the least we can do is to make sure that we have the name right and that we have the name of the show or the publication right while we're having the conversation. It shows respect for the interaction. Ooh, that's a lot for interview logistics. All right. And that's the third and final thing in our list in the pre-interview process. Remember, determine what your key message or messages are. Research, anticipate. What's the show like? Who are these people? What could the questions be? And make sure you make a note of the what, the where, who's my contact, and get that info right. Questions. Looking into the chat, let me see. Everybody. All right, I don't see any questions. So far, so good. All right, so then we've looked at the context. We need to remember, okay, who are we speaking to? What do we need to keep in mind as we are making the best of this opportunity? We have to look at we have looked at the pre-interview process and how to make sure that we are ready for that opportunity. And then when we actually get into the interview now, what are the things that can help us to make it absolutely awesome? So first, we want to make sure we're actually listening to the questions. I can't tell you how many times I've had persons mishear, and it's not because I haven't spoken well enough, but they're not paying attention. They're in their heads, perhaps distracted, but the question is not what they're answering. And it's not that they decided not to answer. It's not a strategy, but just that they weren't listening carefully. I don't know what active listening is. It's paying attention. It's not trying to anticipate where the person is going. It is, if you're in person, showing that you understand so that the relationship goes well. And it really involves your being present and here and not off elsewhere, worrying about something or thinking ahead or what you should have done differently in the previous question. All right, so the next thing is that you want to be concise about what's going on. As a matter of fact, let me just run through all of them. You want to be concise. Don't talk for long. You want to be clear as well with the way that you're answering. You want to also figure out how to move from what is asked to what you want to say, and we call that bridging. You can use those techniques as you go through. And the fourth and final, you want to make sure that you are showing the appropriate side of your personality. What does that mean? We're going to go through that, going through that one by one. All right. First is listening actively. And we've got that. I mentioned it and I can repeat, make sure you are present in your head. Make sure you are answering the questions that's asked. And I put an asterisk there because you may choose not to answer that particular question, and then you want to use a technique to answer a version of the question. Or maybe you want to directly say that that's not one that you can answer at this time, but perhaps somebody else would be more appropriate. The point is that it shouldn't be that you didn't listen properly or you misunderstood, and so your response has no relation to the question that's asked. And you don't have to worry if you don't understand a question. It's perfectly okay to ask me to rephrase it, or it's perfectly okay to ask me, do you mean X, Y, and Z? And you ask me the question in your words, just to clarify, just to make sure. And if I use a word in my questioning that you're unfamiliar with, the same technique applies. You don't have to feel no way. You don't have to worry. You don't have to feel embarrassed. You can say, by X term, do you mean so and so? Or could you explain what you mean with that particular term? Nothing wrong with that. You want to also look for those opportunities that we spoke to include your key message. And you can't properly bring in your message if you're not listening. Because when you're listening to what they're saying, what the interviewer is asking you, then you are better able, your brain in the background, not in the foreground, can say, oh, you can latch on to any opportunities that present themselves to bring in your key message. So be present. Then you want to ensure that you are concise. Don't take long in answering a question. And clear, being clear is extremely important as well. So what happens is that many times we think that we have to explain and explain and explain and explain and explain, or perhaps give a lot of context and background before we actually answer the question. And actually, the best technique is to answer first in 30 seconds. Can you answer that question in a 30-second version of your explanation? When you do that, if the person somehow has an additional question, a follow-up question, etc., you would have already answered. And if you're answering in a 30-second version, that's a sound bite. What does that mean? That means the newsroom can use what you have said easily to use it in perhaps a news story, or what you've said can be used in other programs because it's not too long, it's not too convoluted, it's easily understood. So first off, you want to be concise. You want to speak to the average audience member. You don't want to be using jargon and information or terms that are only in the financial world, for example, or only in the broadcast world. In my case, I have to remember not everybody knows what an OB is. In another life, OB was a brand that related to something else differently. You want to make sure that whomever is listening in your target audience, yes, can understand without having to think too hard about, okay, how does that go? And because I understand doesn't mean that what you're saying connects with me. Because if I have to be translating as you're speaking, I have the knowledge, but if I have to be translating and it takes a lot out of me to stay with you and pay attention, then it's harder for the information to connect with me, to resonate, and for me to remember. So if you use simple language, no jargon, it's better. And if you use short sentences, then that helps the interviewer. It's easier for them to ask additional questions, to get clarification, to follow up on something that looks really interesting or sounds really interesting in whatever it is that you're saying. I have had some interviews where I can't get a word in edgewise. The person just attaches one concept to another and on and on and on. And eventually I just have to come in and say, well, we have the time, or just be definitively, what is the word when you are authoritative, and just cut wherever the person was to ask the other question or make the comment. a good interviewee has in the responses spaces for understanding and absorption by the persons listening, but also for management by the interviewer. Now, when you do that with short sentences, then that works and works well. Okay, so being concise and clear covered. Any questions you have, type them into the chat. The third thing is using bridging techniques. And you know what a bridge, connecting one thing to another, one place to another, going over a river, it's the same thing. You want to be able to gently steer the conversation, the question, to what you want the people to take away, what you want them to remember when you're done, to your key message. And there are several ways of doing that. So one of those, well, generally, you want to make sure that you are speaking to the average audience member. Well, these are the things from the first side. You want to ensure you're speaking to the average audience member. You want to ensure that you're speaking in short sentences. You want to ensure that it's simple language, no jargon. And then after applying those techniques from being clear and concise, then you come across into bridging. And when it comes to bridging, there are different ways of doing this. So one of the ways is to acknowledge the question and then reframe it. And this is something that I've mentioned before when you perhaps didn't understand what the question was that was asked. So you could say, when you rephrase the question, you are asking, is it that you want to know how many persons usually utilize our services on an average basis? And maybe that's not exactly the question that was asked, but maybe that's the question that you feel more comfortable answering, or the version of the question that you feel more comfortable answering. And then you can take it from there. Another way to bridge is to, if you think that the question is perhaps negative, then you can flip it around and speak to the positive. You can highlight positives in the middle of the challenges. So if somebody asks, isn't your company lagging behind in sustainability? You say that the environment is important to you, but aren't you lagging behind when it comes to sustainability? You can say, well, we're aware that there's always more to do. And that's why we've invested in ensuring that we have a specific department. That's why we're continuing with research. That's why we are making sure that we're listening to our customers as we determine the way forward. So you're talking to the positive side. Yes, you might be lagging, but you are not saying that you are lagging behind. If you're going to redirect the question, you want to make sure that you don't ignore it. It's rude for me to ask one question and you just completely ignore it and say what you want to say. You want to acknowledge the question, or at least a part of it, before then moving across to the part that you want to talk about. So if they ask, for example, why did your company have a security breach? Then you could say, well, security, and in particular, cybersecurity, is a top priority for us. And while no system is completely immune, we have implemented additional safeguards to ensure that your information is safe when you enter it into our database. Right? So you've mentioned security, which was a part of the question, but then you move to something else. You want to also use phrases that help you. So you can say things like, that's a good point. What is something you could also consider is, and then you bring in your key message. You could say, I understand your concern. And I think that something that's also critical here is, to bring in your message. You could also say, what we focus on Paula-Anne is actually, and you bring in the thing that you want to talk about. So we're not saying no comment, we're not getting upset or anything like that. But what we're doing is acknowledging what's been asked and taking a part of it as the start of a bridge into the message that we actually do want to deliver. There are more techniques, they require practice. And when you're ready, we at Paula-Anne are here to help you perfect them and get better at them. So beyond bridging techniques, there are also things to consider when it comes on to your personality and how you are coming across. And oftentimes, the sides of our personalities that come across during interviews are the sides that are uncertain or nervous, or sometimes the sides that say, I need to hurry up and get this done because I have other things to do. So the sound of our voice or facial expression or posture sends messages that aren't appropriate messages. At the point of a media interview, you've paid that $165,000 to have your target audience member feel connected to your brand. So you have to always remember what that brand is and showcase the side of your personality that is in keeping with your brand. I'm sure for most of us, the brand is not shy. I'm sure for most of us, the brand is not miserable or angry, like Bounty Cross, hungry, miserable. And therefore, our facial expressions should align with how the brand is to be experienced. So we have to remember that when it comes to the media interview, it's not about how we feel as individuals, the persons who are the interviewees. It's about what is supposed to come across to the audience member that you're targeting. And so you have to make sure you represent your brand, not just you. You have to make sure that you don't respond emotionally. If your interviewer is aggressive, you want to show your stay calm, stay composed, show the right kind of body language. You want to, if necessary, state that you're not. That particular question is perhaps best answered by somebody else instead of you going, oh my gosh, and flubbering your way through, because that's not your area. If you are not the expert in that area, you don't have to try to be. You want to be positive in your language and your attitude. Some of the other things that we think you could focus on are, and then you pick the positive things that you want to talk about. And the way that you speak should sound like you're happy to be there and you believe what you're talking about. You must lift your energy, even if you're not usually a lively, energetic, outgoing person, but you have to at least sound like you enjoy sharing this wonderful idea, concept, brand with your audience. Show your passion for the topic. So I'm going to jump into answering questions. This is the fourth and final part of what we're suggesting that you look at as you are getting into the interview, and just very quickly see if you can remember what they are. Let's see what your memory says. Okay, listen actively. Good job, Nicole. What's number 2? Be concise and clear. Thank you, Stephanie, Taisha. We got it. Imani, Tamalcia. We got that too. What's number 3? What is number 3? Use bridging techniques. Good job, Taisha. Thank you. And then number 4. Yes, Nicole. Did I see Nicole with the answer to number 4? Did I? Nope. Okay. Come, what's number 4? Use use the right side. That's not an A, that's an A, not an R, but yes, the appropriate side of your personality. Stephanie, Tamalcia, thank you. Yes, if you can remember those things, then that should help you to handle the actual interview better. Good job, guys. Okay. So we're working the magic. We've sprinkled a little fairy dust. You now know better how to prepare effectively, how to make sure your messages are concise and impactful, and how to handle any challenges that you might feel professionally with the way that you're bridging, the personality that you're showing. And we are very quickly moving into answering questions that you may have. Okay. Tashika, thank you for the question. I see one from Rashina as well. Everybody else, you can type your questions into the chat. I'll come looking for them. All right. Rashina says, for on-camera interviews or live audiences, any body language tips? Yes. So if it's on camera from your laptop, Tashina, then you want to look at the camera on your laptop or your phone if you're using that, if that makes any sense. So if I am to look at the screen at myself, then I'll seem like I'm looking down. But when I look up at the camera, it seems like I'm looking at you and speaking to you. So if it's on your laptop or phone camera, make sure you're looking not at the image, but at the camera itself, and that the camera is positioned at eye level. So it seems more natural. If you are on camera in a studio, body language tips include having proper posture. You look at persons doing interviews sometimes and they just relax into the chair. And sometimes the chair arms are up here, so they look a little silly. Or for gentlemen, the jackets, when they slouch into the chair, the jacket shoulders are out of position or slouching forward sometimes. And there are so many things that messages that you don't want to send that come from ineffective body language that doesn't say positive, strong, confident, authoritative, friendly. You want to watch your facial expression, making sure only appropriate expressions are shown. So those are a few of them. There are several more. Tashika, from the point of view of the interviewer, how do you politely take back the interview from an interviewee who takes over, especially while on screen? All right, Tashika, we're going to do presenters webinar and then we'll take that on. But that one is a little bit more technical. You have to just really listen hard for that breath that they take and jump right in. We can try that technique. Let's see. How do you appropriately correct an interviewer who uses the wrong terminology or what would be discriminatory terms when referring to your target audience, particularly in a live interview? You have to figure out how to not embarrass anyone that you are correcting. So the phrasing moving into the correction is important. You want to say something like, perhaps you meant to say, and you phrase it as a question, but you don't wait on them too long to answer. Perhaps you meant to say response as opposed to responding. And really what we should do is, and you just move into your response. So very nicely make a suggestion for what you think is the correct thing before moving on to respond. Or perhaps the term gender is one that works better in this situation for various reasons. And then you just move quickly into your response so that we don't spend any time on the correction, but the focus is on the actual answer to the question. Any tips, this says, for handling uncomfortable questions without worsening a PR nightmare? Well, that's a different webinar altogether. Crisis communication, handling difficult interviews. However, you can also use what I just used a while ago to say something to the effect of, that would need to be a different conversation at a different time, and I'm happy to come back and discuss it then. So you're nicely ending this conversation and saying, I would like to be able to prepare and have the right kind of information for what you need with that question. So I'd love the opportunity to address it at a different time. Let's try that. Well, an uncomfortable question. So this is where your bridging techniques come in. How are you going to pivot to a different answer? And then here's a question that says, how do you politely navigate an interview where the interviewer is unprepared, mispronounces your name, your business name, asks questions that detract from your core message, and wastes time? Happens, unfortunately, a lot. So the same principle applies. You're being a gracious guest. Perhaps you meant, or you could just make a little joke. Oh, Paula, I like that pronunciation. Actually, most people say Paula, but I'll work with Paula. Or actually, most people say Paula, and you just move right along with that. Or you can repeat the question, and instead of pointing out that it was an error, you just say the right thing, as opposed to saying, oh, you said it wrong. You just say, oh, our company, QV Limited. Well, what we do is, so you don't draw attention to the fact that you are correcting if you don't have to, and you nicely continue. All right, now it is actually just about 2 minutes to the top of the hour. I'm welcoming all the questions. Please continue typing them into the chat, and what we'll do is pull them together and send out responses to them. But thank you so very much to each and every one of you that joined for this. It's been interesting trying to compress everything into the time available, but I've enjoyed the interaction. And this is what we do at Papande. We are available to help you if you need more detailed guidance. We are here.